Hello and welcome to Doing Business in the USA, an event brought to you by Business Live, in association in partnership with the Department for International Trade and the British American Business Council. I'm Alistair Horton and I'm editor of Business Live, which is the business news site from Reach plc, the largest commercial national and regional news publisher in the UK. At Business Live, we work with Reach's partner titles across the North West, including the Manchester Evening News, the Liverpool Echo and Lancs Live. We're here today to help businesses learn more about trading with the USA. We'll discuss routes to market. We'll talk about setting up companies in the USA and about the immigration and legal matters you need to bear in mind when doing business there. We'll talk about the global pandemic and how that's affected business. And of course, I suspect we'll talk a little bit about the political climate in light of interesting events of recent weeks and months. We've got a great panel to discuss all this and to answer any questions that you may have. But first of all today, I'm going to hand over to Lynn Shaw. Lynn is Executive Director at the British American Business Council North West, and she's going to tell us more about her work and the Council's work. Hello, Lynn.
Hello, Alistair. I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank all our speakers today for joining us. It's really great to have this as a BABC event in partnership with yourselves and with DIT. I want to briefly introduce the British American Business Council, because I think we'll have quite a number of people on the webinar today who aren't familiar with this. And it's very much a networking organisation. If we can go on to the next slide. It is the largest transatlantic business network, and each network, chapters as they're called, is an independent organisation, but then works together across the network to promote business in both directions across the Atlantic. There are over 2,000 members, and you'll see that there are chapters based in all the key cities in the US. In the UK, they're in the Northwest in Manchester, in Scotland, in Birmingham, and obviously the key one is in London, where we do a lot of work in terms of liaising with government on business needs in transatlantic trade, and you'll hear more about that later. But in terms of joining BABC, if we can move on to the next slide. The chapters offer a real opportunity for companies to generate new contacts, to learn from people already based in the US. There are quite a lot of expats based in the network who can give really strong advice on the differences in trading between the two markets. So the networking and the information, whilst it used to be the physical events, we've actually got a really strong programme of webinar-based and virtual activities now. We've just had a big financial forum that's run in the last couple of weeks, which went really well. The executive directors in each of the chapters are really well placed to give you local introductions. So they can introduce you to relevant chapter members who can give you advice or help you developing your business. Social events still run, and I know a lot of the US chapters are running some very social Christmas events this time. And obviously, there's a lot of work in terms of lobbying, of raising issues around transatlantic trade. And we do have an annual conference normally. This year it should have been in Philadelphia. It has been delayed due to the pandemic, but we do hope that that will be back on the agenda very soon. So if we can move on to the next slide, if you'd like to find out more, this is the website for the BABC network, babc.org. That gives you links to each of the chapters. If you want to contact the Northwest, my contact number is there, email address, and you can follow us on our BABC Northwest Twitter account. So thank you very much for that opportunity to introduce, and I'll hand back to Alistair.
Thanks very much indeed, Lynn. So we'll now move towards our panel discussion about business in the USA. We've got a panel of experts joining us today. I'll ask them some questions, but for those of you watching online, do remember you'll also have the chance to ask questions as well, and we'll do our best to get all those answered for you. Now, we've got three panellists today, and I'm going to ask them all to introduce themselves, just to take 5 minutes, to tell us more about themselves and about the work they do. And first of all, if I may, I'll introduce Roger Frampton, who's going to talk to us first. Roger. Roger, you're on mute, I'm afraid.
Oh, hello.
Hello.
I haven't touched anything, so...
Hello, Roger, thank you. Roger, we can hear you, Roger. Hello.
Okay, good, thank you. Yes, good afternoon. Good morning for me. What I think if I could have my first slide, please. What I was asked to do was to be available to answer questions. In fact, I have a string of answers to questions that I'd like to start with. That's who I am. I co-founded Export Action in 2007, and we modestly claim it to have been a success. If I could have the next slide. These are my questions: why, when, what, how long, and how much, and perhaps critically, who you could turn to. So I'll deal with those one at a time. Why? The US is the UK's biggest trading partner. It's the largest single country economy in the world. And despite the pandemic, Americans and American companies are still buying. If you want a selling example, in the United States, Amazon will have hired 175,000 additional employees in 2020. If you want a buying example, we had some new team members join earlier this year. We wanted to get them all-in-one desktops. You can't get one for love nor money. All because of people working from home, because of children being schooled from home. You just can't get an all-in-one desktop computer at the moment. So they are still buying. What do you need? I would never do business in the United States without having a US company. And with that, an address and telephone and various office services. Those things will give Americans the confidence to buy from you. They do not typically want to buy from outside the United States. An incorporated company will increase your sales, minimize your taxation, and protect you from US litigation. An accountant should save more every year than they cost. I was pleased to hear that we're going to talk about legal aspects. There's 1.3 million attorneys in the United States, and they're all looking for work. When your company wants to generate confidence for Americans to buy from you, but get it established in the United States before your clients buy from someone else. We call it while your window of opportunity remains open. How much does it cost? Well, I'm going to give you a website in a little while with some fees, but always remember that higher prices don't necessarily mean that you have better quality of service. It costs about, well, getting on for £2,000 to set up in the United States, and around about £250 a month to run an operation. Obviously, that doesn't include sales and marketing, but it is not as expensive as a lot of people would have you believe. The worst price we've heard for incorporating a company was $9,500. We are very much less expensive than that, and just as good. We've worked very hard to make things easy. So how? We have month-by-month agreements. Do try and avoid getting locked into 12 or longer month agreements. Our agreement is written in plain English. It has no small print, and it just gives you 10 simple questions to ask. And as to who, my co-founder and I have decades of US business experience. We share that at no charge. We never charge for informational conversation. We have no sales executives, so you won't get a call every Friday asking you if you've made your mind up. We'll just be ready when you are. We probably save $100,000 a year by not having a sales executive, and we pass that saving of hours on to our clients. So if I can just finish with the last slide, please. We have created, it's not a fancy website, it is packed full of information. It's exportaction.biz. We call it a US business thesaurus, and it has answers to many questions. Obviously, we're 5 hours behind you, so if you wake up with a question on your mind, you can go to exportaction.biz, and there's very likely an answer to your question on that website. So that's it. Thanks for inviting me to join you this morning. I think it's a great initiative. And to repeat what I said at the start, Americans and American companies are still buying.
Thank you very much indeed, Roger, and we'll be hearing from you again shortly as part of our panel. Next, I'd like to introduce Emmanuel Adam, who's going to tell us a bit more about his work. Emmanuel.
Thank you so much, Alistair. Thank you very much, Lynn. Good to meet you, Roger. Good to see you again, Jonathan. And good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me on the session this afternoon and this morning. I say this morning because I'm calling you from the US right now. I'm usually based in London, in the UK. My name is Emmanuel Adam, and the reason why I'm here is because I'm the executive director for the London chapter of the network that Lynn introduced, a chapter of roughly 200 companies and 10 employees. In addition to that, I cover the trade portfolio for the entire network. I'm very pleased to be here. I thought I introduce the organization first and then look into a little bit the political climate that I was asked to talk about. If you go to the next slide, you see a brief description who we are. The origins of our organization are the British American Chamber of Commerce in the US, indeed, and the American Chamber of Commerce. So our London chapter has indeed a legacy of over 90 years in London. If you go to the next slide, you see the network that we are embedded in. We pretty much work with almost anyone and everyone who is part of the Transatlantic Corridor. And that obviously includes the other chapters of the BABC, such as the BABC Northwest, but it also includes DIT, the US Embassy Trade Promotion Arm, other chambers of commerce across Europe, and the British Chamber and the US Chamber on both sides of the Atlantic. In the next slide, you will see that there are only three things, but very substantial things that we as an organization do. We are a network, and Lynn described already what that means, so I won't cover that. But we're also a policy advocacy organization. That means that we are the official representative for transatlantic companies when it comes to interest vis-a-vis the US and the UK government. There are plenty of issues that we cover at this moment. And we have a trade promotion arm which links up with pretty much everything that you may hear today on this webinar in supporting companies to be successful in their expansion plans. And this is what I want to focus on in my next slide. You get a little bit of an idea what we do as an organization. We are a facilitator and navigator, so to speak. That means that if you find us, and we are often the first place you find if you Google expanding to the US, exporting to the US, we would take you through an initial set of questions and take you on your journey to the US. What we do is we provide the official trade and investment guide for UK companies that go to the US every 2 years. The next one is in the works right now. You can find it on the website, and I added the link on the slide. And we have almost every month best practice sessions where business leaders who have already done it report out on how they have done it and what they would have done different if they did it again. It's a fantastic series. It's open to small businesses only, small and growing businesses only, and really meant to be an best practice exchange. If you go to the next slide, that echoes what Roger said. Anything that we do on the trade promotion side is free of charge. You can always join British American Business in London or the BABC chapter in Northwest or elsewhere in the network. But when it comes to the trade promotion side, there's no cost attached to it. If you go to the next slide, you will see that there are plenty of issues that we could talk about. And those who know me know that I can probably walk you through many of this in many days. But we're not going to do this. We're not going to touch on the president in the US, the prime minister, the incoming administration in the US, the effects of the UK leaving the EU or the tariffs. We won't do this at the moment. And because I think I want to disappoint and encourage you at the same time. And the next slide tells you why, because I think actually when you look at it, politics doesn't really matter. And let me in the remaining minute I have tell you why. Because I think when you look at, and that is the next slide, when you look at expanding to the US, what really counts is that you have a good business plan. And that you know what is it you want to do, why you want to do it, where you want to do it, and how. Similar question that Roger already posed to you. And the next slide gives you an idea how we at British American Business do this, how our trade team usually does it. We ask you just very simple questions on what is it that you want to do, what is your product, are you a service provider, do you have goods, where are you based, what is your key audience? And I actually may contradict a little bit Roger here because I think you don't need to have this work, but there are different ways to achieve your expansion, but the answer to these questions will help you guide that path that we then can build for you. And as I mentioned on the next slide is a good example. As I mentioned, what we do is we walk you through the questions and then we say, I think you should speak to one of the international trade advisors, DIT, or you should speak to the Select USA team at the US Embassy in London, or you should speak to a local economic development agency such as Empire State Development, who are also on this call today, or you just speak to us. Sometimes all of these solutions are part of the overall path, but sometimes it's only just one. I conclude with my little presentation with the next slide to just encourage you to say you're not the first one. There have been many companies who have done it before. We know many of those, and every one of them has a very individual, very different story, and every story can tell us actually what is a good path to market. We as an organization, the remaining 2 slides on the next slide, we do a lot of work in addition to the advice. We also help you on the marketing front. There's a lot of free marketing involved. We do a lot of case studies, a lot of promotional material for the DIT, always plenty of things to do. I conclude my introduction with the next slide, that there are still, of course, political things that matter. And there are indeed quite plenty. And in some of them, I think we need to look at, whether it's on the next slide, that current travel ban to the US, which is, of course, something that prevents business people to go, or the tariffs. I think we need to go one slide further, please. The tariffs currently imposed on some UK products. At the same time, we see through the negotiations with the US a huge momentum for trade with the US and a huge momentum for the UK government to help companies, and this is why it's so great that they're part of the series, UK companies, to help them in their ambitions to make something work. In addition to that, we see plenty of new fields where there's opportunity for growth, such as in the green industries or new tech, all of which I think is a good example for why I think right now is actually a good time to look into trading with the US. And with that, I conclude my little introduction. And again, thank you very much for having me. Speak to you later.
Thank you very much indeed. And of course, Emmanuel will be joining our panel very soon. But first of all, I'm going to get our final panelist to introduce himself. We have Jonathan Strasberg. Jonathan, hello. Jonathan, you're on mute, I think.
I was listening so intently to Emmanuel that I forgot to take myself off of mute. And I'm going to reiterate something Emmanuel said. I've helped probably about 100 UK SMEs expand to the United States. And I will tell you that each one has a different story. And understanding your own story, understanding your own objectives, understanding your own resources is absolutely vital. The United States is a flexible enough economy, has flexible enough opportunities for you to arrange a business plan that suits both your risk tolerance and your objectives. Let me tell you a wee bit about myself. I started out as a US lawyer, commercial litigator, meaning corporate litigation, meaning handling litigation between corporations in Manhattan and Chicago, and then moved my practice to New Jersey. I moved to the UK in 2007 as a US lawyer, law licenses. I visited the BABC, and they said that there were lots of SMEs in the UK that really kind of fell between the cracks when this was back in 2009, when it came to getting professional advice for expanding to the US. And as I looked around me and as I researched that, I found indeed, the UK is loaded with lawyers, US lawyers, but most of them are here to service multinationals. And most of them have fees that are sort of out of reach of the smaller companies. And that's a niche that I slowly started to fill. What I discovered was that the SMEs weren't only left out in the cold for legal help. They were kind of neglected for accounting, for insurance, for immigration, banking, and a number of other things. So in my years of networking since then, I've come across and made wonderful contacts and developed wonderful relationships with other professionals who do in their disciplines what I do in mine. And that is helping UK SMEs expand to the United States. I have lots of clients who are incorporated there, lots of clients who are not incorporated there. I would say that of the clients I have had, the ones that seem to have had the most problems were the ones that set off without really starting their homework. I get so relieved and joyful when somebody calls me saying, I'm thinking about going to the US probably in about another year, and I'd just like to explore the terrain. And I know that this person, if he or she becomes a client, is going to be well educated, well prepared, able to answer their own questions, and will know when a red flag comes up. I would say the biggest problem for UK companies going out to the US arises from that old adage that we're two countries divided by very similar ideas as to what's reasonable in a commercial transaction. And as a matter of fact, if you looked at a UK, at an English and a US commercial contract, to the layman, they would seem very similar. But what these people would be unaware of are the latent differences, and the differences, things that can make all the difference in the world in the event of an unfortunate dispute. Small percentage of my clients come to me having been first to an American law firm, and they get wonderful advice from an American lawyer which would be wonderful advice. There are certain forms of liability analysis. I would say, stated another way, something the UK companies really have to get their head around is the way you assess the financial risk of a dispute in the US is very different from the way you would assess the financial risk of a dispute in the UK. And much of what I do is educating my clients about this. I have a blog, and I write a number of articles about it, and I have we talked about incorporation. I don't actually simply incorporate a company, and I've had clients come to me saying, I need you to incorporate me so I can do business. And my response is usually, well, if all I do is incorporate you, I'll be giving you enough tools to get yourself into a boatload of trouble, and they're going to need along their journey. and have conference calls with all of them. And my objective during this sort of 8-week period is that these clients become educated enough both to understand the main guiding issues, 9 out of 10 times are somewhere between law and tax, and also to know when to call a professional, when something's not quite right. I didn't prepare any slides. Forgive me. The name of my company is True Course Limited. I'm at truecourselaw.com. If anybody would like to speak with me, I'm more than happy to answer questions and all. I guess I'll keep it relatively brief there, and let you move on.
Jonathan, thank you very much indeed. Thanks to all three panelists for joining us. Just a reminder to everyone watching that we will take your questions. We've already got some questions coming in, so please keep them coming, and we'll do our best to get some of them answered for you at the end. I'm going to start off with a simple first question, I hope, because we've already had a few suggestions for the kind of things that businesses from the UK need to do if they're looking at trading in or with the USA. And I want to ask the panelists just one by one, let's say there's a company in the UK, it's doing well, it's got a product or service that's doing well, and it thinks, right, now's the time for me to look at the USA. What's the first thing that company should do you think? I'll start off in the order we started. So Roger, if I can ask you that one first of all. Roger.
Research and plan. That's the first thing. I love it when people bring to me a well-researched into their market, they need to have a policy of, it's kind of been touched upon by others, but are they going to sell direct to consumers? Are they going to sell through e-commerce? Are they going to do distribution agreements? Are they selling to companies, to government, to individuals? They need to research their plan, and it will be different in the United States. Our experience is, and I perhaps should preface this by saying that in the 1990s, I worked with 2 UK software companies which went public, one on London Stock Exchange, one on NASDAQ. And when I fulfilled my service agreement, I felt completely burned out. I developed a really good relationship with DIT. We used to call it UK Trade and Investment. And they were very helpful in helping us research the US market. We knew the US market was important because we wanted to be a global player. Until you've done the US, you're not going to be a global player. We also wanted to raise the money to start up in the States because we knew it was going to be expensive. And we made some horrendously expensive mistakes, but we survived, and we profited from those experiences, good and bad. But what we kept coming back to was our plan, which was market research based.
Thanks, Roger. And Emmanuel, over to you, if I may. What would you recommend the first step should be for a British business?
Well, it's part of Roger's answer, but maybe even a pre-step. In the end, you need to know whether you can sell your product and to who. So that is really, after many years of working with different companies, the most important question. So do you have an existing client base in the UK that you can replicate in the US? So that means you have a client in the UK that also has a base in the US. Can you go through them? Or do you have already online inquiries from US clients for your product in the UK? Or do you go into the US, now your product is good, but you don't actually know who's going to sell it? Or do you know that only a specific audience within the US will buy it? So Lifesaver from Hull, a bottle that filters water, they wouldn't have gone just all over the US. They knew that there's an adventure, outdoor adventure interested audience on the West Coast. So this was the audience that they needed to target and needed to attract. Or Meadow of Farm, based in London, they do consultancy services. They had clients already in the UK that already had an office in the US. So they would go via that existing client into the US. Before you know that there is an audience, everything else, in my view, doesn't really matter, because that is the key question to answer.
Thank you. Thank you. And Jonathan, you said at the start that you're relieved when clients or potential clients come to you having done some preparation. What's the first most important bit of preparation they should do and that you're happiest to see when they've done it?
really exactly what Roger and Emmanuel have been speaking about. I've never had somebody call me to inquire about my legal services before they've known that they have something of a market in the United States. Having said that, I've had loads of conversations. I'm nothing like the sort of expert that Emmanuel and Roger would be in terms of investigating, researching, and developing a market, but I have clients that attend trade shows and attend all sorts of trade functions in order to try to investigate the market there. 9 times out of 10, once the client starts getting their feet wet in the United States, having a few contracts, having some business, some income, they start getting a sense of what might lie ahead. Really, until that time, there's very little I can do. And in terms of legalities getting started, the first thing you look at is a non-disclosure agreement. So if you are doing research and you are meeting with people, you want to make sure that you have that if there is something special in what you're offering, that's not so easily bandied about and thrown around. Now, this is the first place people make a mistake. They'll go to the United States and they'll use a non-disclosure agreement under UK law. And unfortunately, that will get you nowhere in the United States because a UK law, English law, because an English court has no jurisdiction over what somebody in the US does or doesn't do. So it's in this respect, the law can be a little bit counterintuitive. We very often feel most comfortable on our home turf. So when we write on a non-disclosure agreement that this is governed in accordance with English law, we feel comfortable, and unfortunately, that's a false security. Before you start getting into any relationship, just have a quick talk with the various professionals, and you start with obviously people who can help you with market research, but never forget your accountant and never forget your lawyer, just to have a chat.
Thank you, Jonathan. And you actually almost answered the next question I was going to ask, which is this. You referenced earlier on that quote attributed, I think, to George Bernard Shaw about Britain and the US being two nations divided by a common language. And I wondered if there were some mistakes perhaps that people made from the UK doing business in the USA because they were perhaps complacent or thought things were rather more similar than they are. And Jonathan, you just mentioned a very good legal example of that. And Roger, I'll turn to you on that one if I may, and just say, are there any sort of common mistakes that you've seen like that people should avoid and be aware of early on?
Yeah, you never stop learning. I am sitting in my home office at the moment. I drive about 12 miles to our business office, and I would guess that I pass 20 animal hospitals, veterinarians, and so forth. And a couple of months back, I was talking to an American who described how he was going to sell software as a service to vets. And I thought he would do very well. He was actually talking about veterans from the military. It was nothing to do with animals at all. There are many examples of it starts off when people fail to Americanize their sales literature, their websites, and so forth. Because when you spot a mistake on a website, and that's not just spelling color with a U in it or putting a Z into Americanization. When you spot a mistake, it kind of suggests that the company is sloppy and doesn't pay good attention to detail. So you never stop learning. One of the best things you can do in translation terms, I mean, I really relate to the non-disclosure agreement, which I think most of my clients describe as a waste of paper. Enforcing them is terribly difficult. And it's a good reason to have a decent attorney, because if you're going to sign one, let alone produce one, you really do need expert advice. We introduce people to attorneys who specialize in business. They don't do drink driving, they don't do divorce, they specialize in business. And we use a number of, and the same applies to accountants. Over the 13 years that we've been in business, we've built a little collection of them so we can avoid any kind of conflict of interest. But meeting the accountant, the attorney, and knowing that they are experienced in American law for UK companies is terribly helpful. I don't know what your experience is, but we've managed to get our accountants, there's 3 firms of accountants we use, and probably sorry, I'd better introduce you to Stanley, who is being a pain in the butt. But this is one of the benefits of working at home. Go away. They're experienced in helping UK clients, and unlike many American attorneys in America, they don't charge an annual retainer. They work on a fee per project. Our advice on accountants and attorneys is always to ask for a cost estimate before you instruct them to proceed with any work, because it can run away with you. We found a lawyer in Houston, Texas recently who was charging $10,000 an hour. It just makes me gulp. How can they possibly be worth that much? Silicon Valley, Manhattan are dreadfully expensive places to get legal advice. And what another sort of twist to American for UK people is that attorneys are not licensed to practice throughout the United States. They're licensed by states. You occasionally meet an attorney who is licensed in more than one state, but it makes your choice of location very important.
Thank you very much indeed to Roger, and indeed to Stanley. Actually, again, you've moved me on quite nicely to another question, and I'll start with you, Emmanuel, here, which is about geography. This is the third of these similar events I've done recently. We've done events on the Middle East and on Africa, big diverse regions. And of course, we turn to the USA. It's one country, but it is of course a massive and diverse country in itself, which provides great opportunity, but of course also great challenges. So I was going to ask all the panelists, and Emmanuel, I'll start with you if I may. What should UK companies looking to move to the US, what should they do about that? How should they pick their markets, and how tightly should they target their geography at first when they first go to the USA? Emmanuel.
Thank you so much, Alistair. And this would have actually been one of the points that I would have raised in your previous questions among the 6 that I had experienced over the past year or so, which is indeed a common mistake that companies from all over the world, but that includes British companies, do when it comes to the US, is by going too wide or too narrow. Too wide means that the US is very big. 50 different states, 50 different jurisdictions, 50 different markets, 50 different audiences. So in my experience, in our experience, what we learned early on was that start small, start with one market, build your audience there, build your product line there, and then expand from there. Now, sometimes that is not possible. Then you look into a region. I mentioned the company Lifesaver earlier with those water filtering bottles. They, in the end, ended up having a warehouse in Utah, and from there had their salespeople go out into the West Coast area to sell those bottles through different distribution channels. But overall, alone to set up a company and to establish a company, if you wanted to do that, go small first and pick 1 or 2 states or one region. At the same time, also don't go for what's always common. There's always the default option, which is New York or Los Angeles or San Francisco. So there are plenty of other great options. And again, going back to my initial comments, once you know what your service and product is that you want to bring into the US, and once you decide whether this is via exports or via going directly, define where's your audience, where does the audience sit, and then decide where do you go. Because sometimes the solution may actually be in a very, very different place, either because it is more convenient from a geographical point of view, or because you may happen to have a fantastic support system on the ground, whether it be in Mississippi or in North Carolina, South Carolina.
Thank you very much. And Jonathan, over to you then. Geography, what are the lessons you've learned, or what would the messages be that you would give to people from the UK looking to go to the US?
These decisions should be commercially driven. in the first instance. So for instance, if you are manufacturing and distributing goods, you'll find that loads of American manufacturers and distributors are located in what we call the Midwest, which is a little bit of a misnomer. It's sort of like the western side of the eastern half. And the reason they're located there is because most goods are transported throughout the United States by lorry. And if you're located in one of those states somewhere between Minnesota and Kentucky, you can reach 80% of the U.S. market within a 24-hour lorry drive. So you'll see that a lot of manufacturers, distributors are located there. If you are in software, you may well be in San Francisco, New York, Boston, Dallas, depending upon where your customers are, where you want to be. Nobody ever scuttled their company by choosing the wrong state to incorporate it. This is not a giant thing. It's kind of important. It's an important thing, but it doesn't have a huge impact, and it's not determinative. By all means, what you want to do is like Emmanuel said, learn enough about your market, see who's going to buy, see where your supply chain is, see where you're best located in order to make the most impact in the United States. It's not 50. You know, some people overemphasize the idea that there's 50 different states, and I think the reason they do that is because the UK is a relatively centralized political and economic system. The US is a federalist system, and other countries such as Germany with a federalist system, such as Canada with a federalist system, understand that it just adds another layer. So to put this in perspective, when I looked at 2017, the gross domestic product of the United States was over $17 trillion. A giant amount of that was within the United States, going across state borders, absolutely without a hitch. So I don't overemphasize the idea that this is 50 different states. Yes, it's 50 different states simply because it's a federalist system, and you just have to learn about a new level and a new layer of tax. And most of the commercial laws are very similar. Some of the employment laws change. Most corporate and commercial law takes place on a state level rather than a federal level. There are some overarching federal laws that will impact, but really a company that's successful in the UK will have become savvy enough to master the differences in the US in a relatively short amount of time.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. I wanted to turn to sectors now and to ask the panel if there were any particular sector areas at the moment that would be particularly fertile ground for British companies looking to go to the US. Roger, I will turn to you on this one to start off. Sectors, what should people look at?
Thank you, but I'm going to go back to the previous discussion and say, if you want to annoy somebody in Washington, D.C., just keep referring to 50 different states. Washington, D.C. is not a state. In our experience, it does not matter where you are in the United States, providing you are in the United States. Americans have the same aversion to buying from outside the US as I do from Nigerian princes and Afghan warlords. It is a very parochial country. Points are very well made. We based our company in Florida, and we did it because of the low cost of living and the high quality of life. It's a huge education state. We have no trouble employing very well qualified graduates. And as to sectors, to get to the point that you asked me to speak on, we find that they replicate what's in the UK. If you're selling software to businesses, then that's what you focus on. Don't allow yourself to be diverted from that. Focus on what you do. Focus on your success in the UK, because you learn from that experience. We recommend our clients to take what we call concentric marketing for sectors. If you're in a vertical sector, banking, for example, then sure, go to the banks. Remember that Wells Fargo, Bank of America aren't in Manhattan. People think they are, but they're not. If you want to sell to manufacturers, then you can sell to the Midwest from Florida. We know that. We have companies that do it. If you're selling to consumers, then most of the people that we work with are using Amazon. Amazon, we have noticed their prices are rising. Perhaps that's why they're paying such big Christmas bonuses to everyone. But Walmart has addressed viciously the Amazon target market for consumer spending. They were up 34% in the last quarter of last year. So replicate what you do in the UK. The sectors, that's where I would go to DIT and ask them for one of their overseas market introductory service reports. And you know, these people have, is it 12 consulates in the US, I think? Go to them and say, I am thinking of selling harnesses for horses that draw plows. And they will hopefully tell you, forget it. They can be brutally honest. Did you know Henry Ford had an attitude towards market research where he said, if I went to farmers and asked them what they wanted to help them be more efficient, they would say, buy faster horses, not buy a tractor.
Thank you very much indeed, Roger. Emmanuel, I'll turn to you. Are there any particular growth sectors in your observation that firms in the UK could look at that are already operating in those sectors?
I think in addition to Roger's comments, what I would do in this case is to check in with DIT and their website, because DIT does indeed have a list of priority sectors that they advocate for. It's usually a range between 6 and 8. And the same is true for Select USA, the investment arm from the US Commerce Department. So both have usually a list of sectors that they consider as key for foreign companies to invest in or to be part of. But overall, maybe with one addition, which is that I mentioned earlier, it changes always a little bit. And I think right now, with the new administration come in, I think there will be a huge emphasis on new tech and green tech and the green industry generally. So that's certainly something to be interested in. But overall, it doesn't really matter too much. What maybe, that's a final comment on this question, is that there are more and more sectors or services that haven't been considered as an export yet, and that can now be added to the portfolio.
I might bring Lynn in a moment. But I'll bring in Jonathan first of all on this, and then I might see if Lynn's able to answer that question as well for us, actually. But Jonathan, first of all, in your work, are you seeing any particular sectors that are particularly prominent at the moment in Anglo-US trade?
Recruitment has gone mad. It is just so busy. And of course, this is primarily recruitment in high tech. Any sort of high tech. And I suspect, well, I think part of this might be due to COVID, because so many people in this sector can work at home. And so the jobs are still there and they're still quite active. But the other reason for that, I think, is that there is a mode of operating in the UK recruitment market that isn't quite advanced in the US. So recruitment companies are moving over there fast and furious. I have an uptick in manufacturing. Manufacturing obviously took a nosedive back in last March, but that's coming in now. I have one company actually that was in construction and now can't go there. So they're subcontracting out to a U.S. construction company, but then installing the software for what they're doing from the UK. There's just a tremendous amount of innovation. There is an area of innovation among UK SMEs that I'm just never left bored by how wonderfully innovative small UK companies are. And in your sector, don't assume that the U.S. will be competitive. Obviously, it's the most competitive market in the world overall, or one of them. But don't assume for an instant that there's something they have in the U.S. that you don't have here in terms of innovation. So have a close look at whatever market you're in, and you may well find that you do things a little differently that might be attractive.
Super, thank you very much indeed. And I think we do have Lynn back with us, I think. Lynn, I just want to ask you what some of the sort of key sectors are that businesses are focusing on at the moment.
Certainly, and obviously with everything that's happened, the life sciences and pharmaceutical sector is extremely strong. And we've been doing quite a bit of work with companies on partnering on life sciences with cities such as Boston, and across the Northern Powerhouse, there are virtual trade missions happening. So life science is one of them. Another area is actually picking up on the comments Emmanuel made about green energy, and it's focusing on wind power and working with the northeast of the US. So that's something that's live at the moment, that we're working on activities there. For generally across the piece, technology is always important. New technologies in all areas, because that's med tech, that's education technology. It's obviously a big increase in use of technology through the situation of everybody working virtually. So all kinds of software applications. And food and drink, a traditional sector, but still a very popular one for companies. And there's a great demand, particularly from the expat market, for British foods and drinks in the, if you like, traditional brands. So there's a lot of interest there. And then I think Emmanuel picked up on, again, food and drink, but on the healthcare and sports drinks and the opportunities on some of the specialist products there. So yeah, very broad range.
Lynn, I'm going to keep you on for a moment, if I may, because we had one question in from our audience today, which I think you might be able to help answer. It's a question from Dr. Lawrence Ojibulem, and he says, I am from the life science sector, developing medical devices, and I'd like a presence in the US. Is there currently a government programme for people and businesses like mine?
There isn't a government programme as such, but as we've already heard about, there is a programme where companies can have tailored research commissioned on their behalf through the staff at the British embassies and consulates in the US. Now, it's done by a partner organisation, and there is a portal that companies can submit their information, have a discussion around their objectives, and then get very tailored information. And I think when Karen comes on to talk about DIT services, she'll probably pick up on that one more.
Super, thank you very much indeed, and that's a useful reminder that Karen Holden from the Department for International Trade will be closing off our event today. Now I'm going to return to our panel, if I may, and I am going to ask about COVID and about the pandemic. Obviously, as we speak, there are true signs of hope with news of the vaccines and the approvals and rollouts. So hopefully we can look forward with a little more positivity. But I wanted to ask each of the panelists how the pandemic had affected trading with the USA, and also how you think things will develop over coming months and years, given the good news that is happening. Emmanuel, can I start with you here?
Thank you very much. And this is, of course, the most important question these days, very much reflected in our experience over the past 8 months. I think the story is at least twofold. On the one hand, the ambitions and activities in the corridor have slowed down over the past 8 months for obvious reasons, because the majority of companies in the UK and other countries had to focus on sustainability and survival in some parts. That is one story, and that is certainly what we have seen, and therefore we have also focused on making sure that companies that sit within the general trading environment in the UK have all the resources and access to government's programs that they need in order to be resilient enough to come through this time as sustainable and safely as possible. At the same time, what we have seen is that companies who were already active in the transatlantic corridor have actually been more resilient than maybe those who are not as externally facing. We expected actually a lot more companies to say we have a hard time, but at least in our experience, and we have done a number of sessions over the past few months, we didn't really see that, which is a good sign that proves, I think, what DIT and other important stakeholders in our field keep saying, which is that if you feel that your company can do that, being a company that trades will actually make you more resilient and help you grow. In terms of 2021, I think, like with everything else, we hope for recovery across the board, and trade can be part of the solution. It will not be the only solution. It will be part of the solution. Maybe one thing to have on radar, which is that governments on both sides of the Atlantic will, I'm sure, do a lot of efforts, make a lot of efforts to encourage that recovery through incentive programs that you can take advantage of if, now I go back to Roger's comment earlier, if you have a physical presence in the market, whether it be a US company in the UK or a UK company in the US or a UK company in the UK.
Thank you. And Jonathan, to you, how has the pandemic affected the companies you've been dealing with, and what comes next?
Those that are highly dependent on face-to-face contact have taken a hit. So I have my clients who are in in-person entertainment or immersive entertainment, they've slowed down a lot. Those that were in manufacturing have slowed down a bit. But to be honest, I'm quite surprised that things in other areas really haven't slowed down that much. I think there's a term which, it's a very common term and it always escapes me. It's what the term startups use to sort of rearrange the marketplace and find themselves a niche. What is that? It's disturbance or I forget the term, but I think what you're going to find is, nobody knows how we're going to, how some people are going to make it through the next few months or year. It's going to be very difficult. People are going to try their best. We can't prognosticate about that other than it's going to take a tremendous amount of fortitude. However, without minimizing that at all, what I would look forward to is what I anticipate to be a giant blossoming of innovation after that, because so much will have been redistributed in ways that we can't really guess right now. I think that if we tried to see what was going to be happening at the end of 2021, I would take anybody's guess with a grain of salt. I think probably the best thing you could do would be to position yourself so as to be able to act quickly and innovatively with whatever opportunities come up, because you can't guess right now what those opportunities might be. And I don't normally ask people to race to open up a US company. I think sometimes it's necessary, sometimes it's not. It's not a giant mistake if you do or if you don't, depending upon your risk factor. But in this instance, depending upon your sector, I would probably err on the side of the investment early rather than late, if it means that you can respond to a market condition more quickly. Because being alert, being awake, and being really open-minded to new opportunities, I would say probably by summer of next year, you should really be adopting that attitude of being awake and alert and on the lookout for new opportunities and new ways of thinking and a lot of new players.
Thanks, Jonathan. And Roger, finally, for this question to you. How's the pandemic affected businesses as you've seen it? And again, what do you think comes next?
I think if I had one piece of advice for anyone who is interested in understanding the pandemic, it would be to stop watching TV and listening to the radio and buying newspapers. I have a home in London. I have a home in Florida. I know that things are much worse in the UK than they are here from all sorts of perspectives. Just about all our clients who email me say, hope you're safe and well, how are things? Well, I can tell you that I haven't met or know of anyone who has had COVID-19. No one, not one person. People in the UK don't tend to understand that, we touched upon earlier, how huge America is. Florida is bigger than England. Our nearest hotspot for pandemic is over 300 miles away. Where we live and work, there's no high density housing, there's no mass public transport system. And as I said, I don't know anyone who, I know people who've been tested, but I don't know anybody who has found positive. So I think it's very important to maintain perspective. In terms of business, the pandemic, I really don't know. I don't want to take credit for this. Last year, our revenue was up 39%. 2019 was up 39%. We've only just started December of 2020, and I know that it is going to be substantially increased again. I think it's because we work with good, intelligent companies who apply their business model to the United States. Most of them do what we call concentric marketing, where if they have a non-vertical market, they'll start off in Clearwater, Florida, and just gradually go out and out and out. Because one of the great things about Americans is that they'll talk to you. They will tell you about their business. The best questions that a UK company can ask when they get an order is, who else should I be telling about this? Because Americans love sharing knowledge. If you don't get an order, then say, I'm sorry, not choosing to buy from me, who should I be talking to? And they'll tell you, they'll share that information. As far as the pandemic's concerned, the worst thing that's happened in my life, but it really hasn't hurt our business at all.
Thanks very much indeed, Roger. And as I say, hopefully with the news about vaccines, we can move forward with some confidence, but none of us have a crystal ball. We shall see. Thank you very much for your insights. I'm going to turn, I think, to some questions from the audience. We've had a couple of questions in on matters immigration and visa, so it seems to make sense, I think, for me to put them together. One question we've had is, what is the panel's advice on relocating staff from the UK to the US? And can investment in the US make getting a visa easier? Emmanuel, I'll turn to you on that one. Even, just for a general overview point of view, how do you find things when it comes to relocating staff then from Britain to the US?
Thank you very much. I mean, Jonathan will be even more an expert than I am, but we cover the portfolio quite extensively. So the short answer is to your second part of the question, yes. There is an investor visa category for British citizens who wish to do business and invest into a business or part of a business in the US. There's also the opportunity to do an intercorporate transfer between a company that has an operation in the UK and a branch or a second entity in the US. So it's absolutely possible. It's fairly straightforward. To get a visa, you have to go through a fairly straightforward visa process at the US Embassy in London or via the consulates. There have been rumors over the past couple of years or so that visa processes had been delayed or put on hold. We have been confirmed actually this week by the consular section at the US Embassy that this is not the case. What to look out for, though, is that there are currently travel limitations in place for any British citizen, in fact, who is not a US resident or a citizen of the US. That adds a little bit of complexity and something to look into, but overall, these visa categories exist.
Thank you, and I will turn to Jonathan now. Actually, on that point, starting off with that question about investment, can it help make getting a visa easier? Jonathan.
Well, there are certain. Let me start off by saying I'm not an immigration lawyer.
Of course.
I work very regularly with immigration lawyers, so I'm somewhat conversant on the topic. And yes, there's an E class of visa, and the most popular one is called an E2 visa, and that's an investor visa. And what the United States government is looking for is that a particular company is putting at risk enough of its money to make not succeeding hurt a little bit. It's inviting you to, the US government wants you to come to the United States, wants you to invest, but they want you to succeed. So they want to make sure that you've got skin in the game, if you will. So that's what that visa is based upon. It is, the raison d'etre of that visa is investment in the United States. As to the amount, it's often a function of the business plan and your overall worth. But very often, amounts somewhere between $40,000 and $100,000 are I've heard immigration lawyers use. But also to that point, I've worked with enough accountants, myself and immigration lawyers, all agree that a UK company going to the US is going there primarily for one reason. It's because they're successful. They're successful enough to have the money to invest in another country. And if they're successful, it's because they have a certain culture of that has caused them to be success. And it's very important that they adapt, that they pull that culture over to the United States. There is, I don't know what the numbers are, but there's absolutely a different rate of success between those companies that have sent some employees over the United States for a certain amount of time in order to establish the culture there, and those that haven't. It doesn't mean that you have to send somebody over. This is just one of those things that goes into the mix and raises the average likelihood of success. And the other thing you have to remember is that employment in the US is far more fluid than it is in the UK. So you can have an employee today and not have that employee tomorrow, depending upon the contract. Having somebody from the UK based there, developing relationships with American employees, American directors, American officers, whatever it may be, it can be really, really helpful. And of course, the proviso and all that, or the qualification of all that, is depending upon your business plan, depending upon your product. There are companies that really never set foot in the United States and make a boatload of money, and there are companies that have to have a presence there. And if you do have to have a presence there, and if you are going to be customer facing, and if there are processes and procedures and things you need to do to make sure that your service or your goods are delivered in a way that makes your customers happy, then it's a really great idea to have somebody there at least for a couple of years, or maybe even a few months a year.
Yeah, that's
that would require a visa.
That's interesting, Jonathan. Yeah, a subject to visas. Another question we've asked is been asked is by a company that's opened an office in California and is asked if we'd be able to send some of our staff to train and build the company. Obviously subject to visa, but it's interesting that you sort of return to a similar point. Thank you, Jonathan. Roger, I'll turn to you on this and on the general question really of staff from the UK going over to the US. The US to work. Has that been something that you and the companies you work with do successfully?
Yes, I have an E2 visa, incidentally, and it probably took me the best part of a year to get it. I used to come over for 90 days at a time using ESTA. My latest intelligence is that the US won't let anybody in with the ESTA visa waiver program. And my experience of the US consulates issuing visas it interests me. 2 years ago, nobody emailed me saying I'm having a problem with my visa. Now I probably get one a week. I can't, is there anything you can do to help me? One of the, well, if I just, again, make reference to our business thesaurus at exportaction.biz, one of the great issues at the moment, and I wish we didn't have an attorney on the panel, is that there are a lot of confidence tricksters who are claiming to be able to get you visas. In the UK, they typically ask for £5,000, and it's somewhere a year later, you'll get a letter saying, sorry, your application was denied. Can I have my money back? No, I've done the work. Be really selective about who you go to. There's a section on the website called scams, and it identifies some of those scams. But I really do agree with Jonathan. What the Americans want is to have you invest and succeed. And the advice we give to all our clients is when you get to immigration, first thing is don't give them a smart-ass answer because they've heard every smart-ass answer to a question. Don't say, I am going there to do business or to work, do business. Do go there to say, I'm visiting clients, I'm going to a trade show, I'm going to a conference, I'm going to create sustainable tax-paying employment in the United States. That is music to the ears of an immigration officer, and you can't say it to too many or too often. Right now, visas, I have people who claim to have been waiting 2 years to get a visa from the US Embassy.
Thank you very much.
Can I just
Yes, of course.
say very quickly that the US Embassy website has a link to US lawyers in London, and there are wonderful, wonderful lawyers. I haven't heard of any such visa scams myself, but I guess they do exist. But you will be referred to wonderful, wonderful immigration lawyers. If anybody needs a referral to anybody, feel free to contact me, and I'm happy to refer you on to people.
Thanks very much indeed, Jonathan. A quick question on a different subject now from Lorna from D8, which is a brand communications agency which supplies creative services. And she's asking, would that bring up any other obstacles in the panel's experience with similar companies offering creative services in the USA? Emmanuel, I'll turn to you on that one. Is that an issue, do you think, in that sector?
Can you just repeat the question, please?
Yes, of course.
The company from the creative sector
yes, and what she's...
sees it as an obstacle.
Yeah, well, and what she's wondering, I think, is she offers creative services. Obviously, there are similar companies offering creative services in the USA. And I guess it ties into some of the things we've been discussing already, doesn't it, about the fact that if you're a company with an innovative idea, you shouldn't be afraid to go into the US. But in creative services particularly, in an area where there are already companies in the same sector offering similar services, does that pose a particular problem? Or can British companies that are innovative and smart still succeed in the US?
Well, you think you gave the answer. I think if you believe in your product and you know it is good, then there's no reason why to say not to go to the US. But of course, you emphasize, and the question, thanks so much for the question, also emphasizes a general point that the US is an extremely competitive market. And we have indeed seen a number of UK firms not being successful. And in my view, as I mentioned earlier, to go back to my earlier comment, it was because the key audience, the client base or the customer base was not identified early enough. The companies went too early, even with a good product, and then failed. But overall, the answer would be no, it's not an obstacle.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask a final question to all three panellists, if I may. Can the panel suggest best practice to find distributors or local agents? Are there any tips that you would give? Roger, I'll start with you on that one.
It comes back to research. One of the problems that many UK companies find with the World Wide Web is that it's not worldwide. I've followed the fortunes of Tottenham Hotspur for almost all my life. I think I was 4 or 5 when I first learned about them. And if I key in Spurs into Google from my desktop today, I will get the San Antonio Spurs basketball team. I won't get Tottenham Hotspur. It's not worldwide. What we do, and we don't charge for it, is if people send us their top 5 keyword searches to look for, we'll do it in the US, and they will get different front page from Google on that. So it's back to the very starting point of this fascinating conversation, and it is research. Do your research. I mean, it's great to say, oh, go to trade shows, but that takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of expenditure, much of which will initially appear wasted. But start with doing web-based research, but don't do it from the UK.
Thank you. Just quickly over to Emmanuel as well. And any tips that you would give people looking to find those local distributors or partners in the US?
Quickly response. Thank you so much for the question again, because you'll be pleased and interested to hear that this is actually the second most popular question that we get asked after the immigration part. Afterwards, then we have regulatory question and others. But indeed, the second question is, how do I find a distributor? Unfortunately, the answer is it's quite difficult, in fact. There are 3 ways of how you can go about it. The first way is if you qualify for the DIT support program via the International Trade Advisors, they have a network that they can put at your disposal. If you qualify for the support mechanism, and we can, as a follow-up, walk you through how that actually works. The second way to go about it is that if you decide where you want to go, there are, I mentioned that these local economic development agencies that are often publicly funded or linked to the government, they also have existing distributor networks that they can suggest for you. And the third one is actually, and I just looked into a company who just did it last week, to go via local sales representatives, if you find them, and then ask them for their recommendation, because not all the distributor networks will be easily researchable on the internet. So you have to go via local contacts. It's very difficult, but if you start with an organization like BAB, or if you qualify with DIT and then go through a local contact, then I think you will be more successful than spending a lot of time on the internet.
Thank you. And finally, Jonathan, what would your tips be for people looking to find these local distributors or agents?
A lot of hand pressing and a lot of face-to-face contact. I don't think that there's any way around it. Obviously, you want to investigate all avenues. There is a place for the internet searches, and I'm sure that searching in the U.S. is better. And I know that trade shows can be expensive. If it were me, I would probably contact users of my competitors' products and ask them who their distributors are. I would probably do a lot of really feet on the ground research. But after that, once you think you found a distributor or a couple of distributors, understand, and this, I cannot state this strenuously enough, that the distributor is your absolute weakest link in the supply chain. And be very clear when you enter a contract with a distributor. The objective of the contract is not to get the distributor to do what you want them to do. If the distributor wants to do that, he or she will do that. If they don't, nothing you can do will make them do that. The objective of a distributorship contract is to extract yourself from that contract as cheaply, quickly, and inexpensively as possible, so that you can go on with as least harm as possible. This is too many times people get two things happen. One, they get enchanted by a distributor, and it's very easy to get enchanted by somebody who's promising you everything you ever wanted. And they get intimidated by a distributor, and neither of those are necessary. You really need your lawyer. You really need to talk to friends. You really need to talk to other people who have been through this, other business people. You really, the amount of homework you should do on distribution should probably, it is tremendous.
Jonathan, thank you very much. That's all from our panel discussion for today. So thanks to our panellists, to Roger, to Emmanuel, and to Jonathan. But before we finish today, we're going to hear from Karen Holden from the Department for International Trade, and she's going to tell us about how the DOT can help businesses with their exporting activity. Karen.
Hello, good afternoon and good morning to everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me to talk. I think I do have a short presentation, but if Alistair, we can get that up. We've had some amazing tips, advice and guidance from our illustrious panel, from Emmanuel, Roger and Jonathan, about doing business in the USA. And I think everybody should take an awful lot of credence from what's been said. So let's move on to the next slide. We touched a little bit on the current state of the world in relation to COVID. And there's just a few links on here for you that will help businesses navigate the difficult times that we've got. There are some links on there to help you with what the government's planning in terms of recovery strategy, and then it gives you some advice and guidance in relation to that. Also about keeping your businesses safe, being able to work and do the good work and the good business that you do. And also what support is available to businesses in the UK to help you through these troubled times. So please do have a look at those links. I think the slides will be available to everybody afterwards. And if you have any issues or questions, then the International Trade Advisor Network will be available for you. So let's move on and talk some more about DIT support. Lynn kindly did a really good introduction about BABC. We've obviously heard from colleagues on the panel, but DIT often is at the heart of activity and complements everything and everybody that's spoken today. And we should be seen really as a facilitator to help you navigate not only the US, but other markets as well. It's our raison d'etre to actually get businesses trading internationally. So let's move on to the next slide and hear what we actually do. We've heard an awful lot about research, planning, and that's at the core of any business development, and developing opportunities in the US certainly needs an awful lot of research and planning. Fail to do that and really you are setting yourself up to fail. But going back to some of the things that Emmanuel started with in terms of understanding not only your market, but understanding your product, understanding what differentiates you from other suppliers in the marketplace, and being able to communicate those differences and those strengths, your USPs, is going to be very vital. And it'll help you when you're looking at researching and identifying market opportunities. So export research, export planning is vital, and the international trade advisors will be able to help you on that journey with various schemes and support, masterclasses, webinars, tutorials, and talking through with you what your plans are. So lots of support from the trade teams. Just in the Northwest, to give you an idea, we have over 30 trade advisors covering probably all sectors and all markets that can help you. And we're very much open for business and wanting to help you move forward. Other things that we can talk about are some of the schemes and services and support. Pre-COVID, we did copious amounts of trade missions. And I think Jonathan was just talking about how important it is to meet people and actually get to know people before you start doing direct business with them. We're struggling a little bit with COVID, but we are able to offer virtual trade missions, which is a substitute at the moment, and it's a way of networking, meeting people, researching markets, and being introduced to wider networks. So please take advantage of those. And as travel starts to open up, we will return, I'm sure, at some point to be able to do physical trade missions. And I think we all look forward to that opportunity. A little bit has been talked about how various different organisations can help you identify either third parties to work with, collaborators, maybe direct to companies. And we do have services and support that will help companies in the US actually look at what information they need. Maybe it's data, maybe it's market information, statistics before they start to plan their strategy, all the way through to looking at representatives, agents, distributors, as Roger and Emmanuel has talked about. And this can be done through our teams in the States. What I would recommend, though, is if you haven't got an international trader advisor working with you, an ITA, then find an ITA and start talking to them about your plans, and they will guide you through this process and introduce you to the services that we do offer in state, and also the wider networks of support that can be equally as valuable. There is never a one-size-fits-all, and our role as facilitators is to help you explore what's out there, both in the public and private sector. So I think on one of my slides, there will be a link to how you identify which region you need to be talking to, and my details will be available at the end of the presentation, as well as our generic email. So please reach out to us if you haven't got a trade advisor. We've touched on other things like language and culture. It's very important. We tend to see the States as being very similar, and it is in a lot of ways, but equally it's quite different. And it's about understanding those differences, making those differences work to our advantage, and embracing that American ease, and again, making that work for you. We've talked a little bit about the size of the market, and sometimes it can seem intimidating. It is a vast country, but as both Jonathan and Roger have said, it is eminently doable with the right support, the right information, and a will and a determination to do it. If you have good products and good services, and the right team around you, I have no doubt you will do well. So please don't be intimidated by the size, and we will help you find the support that you're needing. Finance, getting paid, all these questions are important. There's lots of information out there that we can point you in the direction of. And again, it's about preparing yourself to do business effectively. There's lots of information available digitally. Our website is up there at great.gov.uk. It's often a first step. Have a look. You'll find tools to help you start with your initial export planning, all the way through to all the events, webinars, seminars, and support that we've mentioned. So don't feel alone in your journey. We're here to help, and there's lots of support. So we'll move on to the next slide, which really is about, well, what are you going to do now? You've had some great advice and guidance. We do suggest that you reach out to us. Our information for the Northwest is there. Obviously, you've got Emmanuel, Roger, and Jonathan, who equally have been able to put their contact details in the chat. Please reach out to everybody. We've got some great advice and guidance, and we can help you further with that. So really, without much ado, I think I've come to the end. I don't think there's any more on the next slide. Other than to say thank you very much for inviting me to talk. I hope that we can engage with a lot of you going forward. And I'll hand it back to you, Alistair. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Karen. And that's it for today's event. So thank you very much for joining us today. All of you have joined us online. Thanks to all our panellists and speakers at what's been a fascinating debate today. Thanks to MSP Global for hosting today. And of course to Katie from Reach Events for organising and bringing us all together today. And of course, thanks to the Department for International Trade and the British American Business Council for partnering with us at Business Live on today's event. Thank you once again for joining us.